Hey, I'm Josh Dick.
And I'm Sam Fritchell. Welcome to Star Wars Deep Digging, Season 1. No, wait, Part 2, Season 1, Episode. Something so and so?
Pretty sure we're on like 8 or something. Okay, we didn't make much progress last time, so let's just get into it. That's the form you use to request an immediate mid cruise extravehicular armament inspection. Why would I want to do that? That's going to send all the gunners in EV suits to inspect every single one of the Devastator's guns. It will take hours to complete. I shook my head in mild annoyance. It was really hard sometimes working with people who had no understanding of the subtleties of data work. As the gunnery captain, you are one of the few officers on board with enough authority to request such an action, and Imperial regulations require the chief gunnery officer to be in charge of the inspection.
What about the high ranking Imperial executives?
Well,
I've heard the high ranking Imperial executives have clearance to everything.
well, that's why he said few officers on board. Obviously, they don't have a lot of executives on board. And Imperial regulations require the chief gunnery officer to be in charge of the inspection. He will be occupied for the rest of the day climbing from gun embankment to gun embankment outside the Devastator. Bolvin still looks confused. He's going to hate me. He never wants to go outside, says it gives him space sickness. If he's outside, I said, then Lord Vader isn't going to corner him in a hallway and ask him about any escape pods. He's the only other witness. Bolvin's eyes widen with understanding.
Lord Vader is actually more of the type to not ask about the escape pods and more to take action against the officers who failed to capture the escape pods.
Well, yeah, but he has to know who first, so he's got to ask questions. Bolvin's eyes widen with understanding. Oh, what do I put down for reason for requesting inspection? Reports of non-responsive triggering mechanism. Bolvan's fingers danced over the tablet. I take it this is to lay the groundwork for later claiming that the guns wouldn't respond? Clever. This is just going to buy you a little time, I said. It doesn't solve the whole problem. He looked up, alarmed. So what else do I do? You fill out a form DKS77MAN. I flicked the form over onto his datapad. Bolvin looked at me with his helpless, watery eyes. I relented. That's the form used to request the detailed manifest of any non-military vessel. In this case, since you'll be asking for the manifest of the Tantai 4, a consular ship on our last departure, you'll need to add an Appendix P2 declaration of classified military need. What am I supposed to do with the Tantai 4's manifest? I flicked over yet another form onto the tablet. You filled application SUG-171TI. He looked about ready to collapse in the face of this mounting pile of data work, which is... Don't you pay any attention to the training halls? You filled an acknowledgement stating that you watched a haul on this family of forms just 2 days ago. Bolvan's confused expression told me that he probably signed the acknowledgement without reading it just to get it off his desk. Relatable. The SUG-171T is designed to dispatch an operational suggestion to another officer. It's used when you need to bypass the chain of command and there's no military emergency. Fleet Command is very proud of this innovation and improving the initiatives of all officers. He acted like he wanted to tear his hair down, but he managed to force himself to calm down. Who am I making the suggestion to and what do I suggest? Commander Praji, like you, hates data work. You just told me that he has gone over every centimeter of the Tantai 4, but I bet you he hasn't documented his search. I know. When Lord Vader is breathing down your neck, the last thing you want to do is more data work. But trust me, if the plans aren't found, everyone is going to want to make sure their behind is properly covered.
You want to know who to bring that form to? You want to know who would be the perfect guy to bring the form to? There's an Imperial officer that you should bring the form to. Really? Who is it? Okay. All right, Mr. All right, I'm looking for a Mr. I snow nothing. Hey, I know nothing. Yeah, of course you do. We all do. Oh, I get the joke now.
Weird thing is that in Star Wars that could be a real name. Remember I'm Again Die? That's why you want to make a suggestion to Prachi to get his troops to fill out multiple copies of Form SRS-98 COMP, Inventory of Captured Vessel. But if the plans are on that escape pod, how is documenting the rest of the ship helpful? I knew then exactly how my teacher felt back when I was a kid, and I just couldn't see the point of showing my work on test. Once again, relatable. Even data work wizards had shameful moments like that. I had to be patient with him. The point, Bolvan, is to let Prodigy be the one to figure out that the missing plans might be on that escape pod without exposing your own role in its escape. So you have him do the careful inventory and send him the ship's manifest you obtained in the previous step. Prodigy will then do the comparison and notice the missing escape pod. But then he's going to ask me why I didn't shoot the pod when it jettisoned, which put me back exactly where I started.
I got a better one. Hey, there's this Imperial officer you should deliver this form to. Who is he called? Ah, I see. I'm looking for a Darth Plagueis the Wise, first name Tragedy of...
Nice. We're not done yet, I said. The trick with data work is layering and complementing. Sounds like you're talking about fashion, he muttered. I let it slide. Your goal is building an unassailable structure for diverting responsibility elsewhere. A kind of escape pod for yourself, if you will. So far, I've taught you how to get Hija out of the way and how to lead Prodigy to discover the missing escape pod. And the only remaining piece is to erase any hints that you could be responsible. How? He spat. I could tell he was about ready to grab my lapels and shake me.
I know someone who's good at erasing data of their past life, but we'll get to that much later.
I deliberately slowed down. You're going to file a maintenance request NIW 59SUD with a Schedule P. He groaned pitifully. He was like a drowning man ready to give up on the straw he was clutching. What is that going to do? Time to explain the coup de grace. Which is a weird term because France doesn't exist in Star Wars. This is the form you use to report visibility impaired viewports and view screens and request a cleaning. A cleaning? That's right. Specifically, a washing of the viewports and view screens near your workstation. He just looked at me. A viewport washing? What? How? Why? Once you put the request in, maintenance will dispatch multiple droids to the station you designates. I suggest where you and Hija were standing, and cover every viewport and view screen with a thick, white foam. The droids will even do it from the outside of the viewports. It's the latest cleaning and polishing agent from the Imperial Lab, specifically designed...
Oh yeah, coup de grace. That's what happens every time your head comes into contact with a lightsaber.
As Count Dooku would know.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically designed to remove laser scarring and scorching from battles. I watched his face go through the stages of terror, confusion, anger, disbelief, astonishment, epiphany, and rapture. Could cover all the viewports, he stuttered. That's right, all of them. With a thick foam, very thick. Can't see a thing through them. Can't see the stars, or the Tanzai 4, or even Tattoo. Or any escape pods. Oh, Arvira, this is brilliant.
I got a good idea. Basically, first off, cover all the windows. First off, delete all records of this mission, and if anyone mentions Tatooine, or Death Star plans, or Princess, annihilate them. We know nothing. They know nothing. No one in the Empire knows anything.
And just to be safe if all else fails, eliminate yourself. That's right, set the self-destruct, go down with the ship like a good captain. That's what Vader would want you to do. Or, this will explain why you couldn't see any escape pods from where you were. Prodigy will just assume that the escape pod was jettisoned without anyone detecting it. And he will then have to bring the bad news to Lord Vader and face the consequences. That smile on his face was truly delightful to me. I loved helping people. Exactly. Now, go and get all the data work done ASAP. You've still got time. He got up, tablet in hand, and ran for the door. But before exiting, he turned around. What can I do to make this up to you? A game of cards tomorrow night? Aha! So maybe he didn't know much about data work, but he did know how to pay for a favor without being too obvious. Maybe, but I've always wanted to know what it's like to fire the guns on this thing. Even data work lizards like pew pew pew, He grinned. I'm sure I can work at a target practice session sometime. I waved for him to go and returned to my endless data work, glad to have laid down another strand in my invisible web of influence. Wonder what happened with this guy. Do you think he went down with the Devastator at Endor?
Probably. A lot of captains went down with their ships at Endor. Especially, not just captains, but admirals. They went down with their really big ships.
And of course, all of the bureaucrats too. Those ships are big. A lot of people die when you bring one down. Alright, next up, Stories in the Sand by Griffin McElroy. If one were to find the perfect summation of what life on Tatooine is really like, the sparseness, the intolerable dryness of it all, one would need not to look further than the sand crawlers that checker the planet's surface with fleeting tread marks each day. Specifically, the sand crawlers we see in the movie are digger crawlers, distinct from the kind we see in the Old Republic era. Every centimeter of a sand crawler is prudently designed to fit the ship's grueling function.
Yeah, the Old Republic ones are Zerka crawlers.
Well, actually, there are other names for them, but I just can't remember those ones off the top of my head. Designed to... And sandcrawlers have a lot of centimeters. Each ship is an identical monument to practicality, and perform each day's work with exacting precision. They do so indomitably, overcoming Tatooine's considerable environmental hazards with ease. On the uppermost deck of sandcrawler stations in the western Dune Sea, a sloped bulk belt carried scrap hoisted from the sands below to a salvage bay seated at the vessel's peak. Underneath that belt was a small hidden gap measuring 1 meter long and at the incline's tallest point, half a meter high, with a width most Jawas would find oppressive. It was an unintended compartment in a vehicle shrewdly designed for maximum efficiency of space. In this wedge-shaped gap, a Jawa named Jot dreamed of starships. Jot had discovered the compartment by accident while working an intake shift, sorting the unceasing flow of metallic debris that the sandcrawler sucked up into its powerful magnetic maw. A particularly lustrous thermal dissipator had caught his eye, as he pushed ancient alloys into piles according to their worth or usefulness to the crew.
I think we found... this would actually make a good Star Wars Tales comic.
You know, a lot of people say that this book is probably the closest thing we'll get to a modern-day equivalent to Star Wars Tales, which is ironic because it was meant to be a modern-day equivalent to Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, and we'll get to exactly why that is soon. But as he reached to pocket the dissipator, Jot watched it tumble sideways between the bulk belt and the ship's hull, tumbling downward and out of sight. Jot searched for the missing dissipator during his limited break time over the next 9 days, hoping not to attract the attention of his peers during his tireless hunts. By pressing his slight frame behind the magleft's pneumatic servos, he could edge his way prone, then pry a flimsy rectangular aluminum panel from the bulk belt's housing, giving him an entryway he could just scrape through, so long as his slightly round belly never ever got any rounder. It was a clumsy act of contortion, but luckily for Jot, he was likely the only Jawa aboard the sandcrawler who could pull it off. This was because Jot was very small, even by Jawa standards. When Jawas first learn to walk, they're given the insulated moisture-regulating robes that will sustain them their whole lives. As infants, their robes are hemmed nearly to the armpits, fabric doubled and folded within. As Jawas mature, the hem is lowered to better cover their newfound height. Most Jawas measure themselves by the number of hems they've had put in. The average Jawa is 5 or 6 by the time they reach adulthood, leaving telltale striations in the thick brown canvas of their life-giving garments. Jot's robe had been hemmed twice. After several months of practice, Jot could slip in and out of the space in seconds. It was vital he keep the maneuver fast and surreptitious. He couldn't let anyone know about his gap. To say the compartment wasn't exactly comfortable would be a disservice to the very idea of discomfort. It was, as the previously mentioned dimensions suggest, cramped, especially while filled with the various baubles Jot had tucked away while on salvage duty. During his shifts, he could simply push items that caught his eye off the side of the belt and directly into his collection. Due to the relative ease of this process, his already sizable hoard had grown exponentially. That one benefit nearly outweighed the Gap's drawbacks, of which there were many. The rolling belts that served as the Gap's ceiling occasionally sagged under the weight of particularly heavy pieces of salvage, flirting with but never quite buckling. The starboard wall of the Gap was actually the sandcrawler's outer hull, which grew unbearably hot to the touch 14 hours of the day. There was enough room in the Gap for Jot to sit without leaning against the starboard wall, so its searing heat wasn't an issue, so long as he didn't absentmindedly try to stretch out and get comfortable admiring his sword. Well, that's one for the nightmares. Unfortunately for Jot, losing his concentration was one of his most honored pastimes. It was not uncommon for passerby to hear a muffled yelp coming from the galley works of the lift's machinery, followed by the uniquely unpleasant smell of singed Jawa fur wafting down the sandcrawler's corridors. You know, I think this is the first time in the Disney canon that we've confirmed that Jawas do indeed have fur, because, you know, they're giant rats.
Oh yeah, they are.
Yeah, you'd think they just look like really short humans, but nope, giant rats. Those faults didn't hamper Jot's contentment with his secret dwelling. Silence, privacy, and solitude weren't just in short supply on the Sandcrawler. The ship was overstaffed and bloated with cargo, both of which created an environment where the concept of personal space was foreign. Jot never knew how much he needed that space until he had it. Now the idea of living without it was unthinkable. He did not dislike his life on the Sandcrawler. It was certainly preferable to the monotony of fortress living, but his hours spent working salvage seemed longer and emptier since finding the gap. Every minute he spent sorting sandblasted metal was a minute he spent away from himself, away from his home, away from Storyteller. The dunes of Tatooine look barren to most off-worlders who, for some typically illicit reason or another, find themselves visiting. That appraisal isn't completely unfair. Life on Tatooine is as difficult as you'd expect from a planet where moisture is scarce to the point of deserving its own economy. But every Jawa, especially those who ship out on a crawler, know the truth. The surface of the dunes is lifeless, yes, but the sand stretches downward forever. Entombed in the endless gritty expanse were more downed ships than there were ships in the sky, more droids than any 10 factories could produce in a century, more wealth, more resources, more history than could ever be excavated or recorded. Makes you wonder if there have been any archaeological digs on Tatooine.
There probably were.
There was not a Jawa on Tatooine who did not believe wholeheartedly that there was more sand below them than there was sky above. The sand, Jawas knew, was more fertile than any off-worlder could ever guess, and the wind was its constant farmer. Most Jawas could tell you tales of unimaginable relics exhumed by a sharp breeze, assuming you folks wouldn't trade, or even Jawaies, which you almost certainly don't. Not sure how to tell the difference between those two. Strange meteors buried in their own glass-crusted craters, ancient cruisers the size of small cities. For that matter, actual small cities. Entire civilizations that had long since dried up and died of thirst, lost to time. Wonder who those belong to. Kumonga.
Ah, yes, Kumonga.
Jot had told the story of his discovery more times than he could count. Every moment of it remained crystal clear in his mind. But I guess that would make them 25,000 years old, and having survived the Rakata compartments, Kumonga built to last. Every moment of it remained crystal clear in his mind. The small protrusion of bone poking out of the ground several meters from his family's cramped clay dwelling, the shock of pain that shot up his arm as he cut his hand on something under the dirt. How the wind that night, matching the frenzy of his curiosity, revealed Jot's discovery in full the next morning. A crate dragon. A big one. The biggest Jot had ever seen, he would interject forcefully with each retelling. Ah, yeah, those things are beautiful.
Those things are rare.
Which makes sense. Something like borderline kaiju sized on Tatooine. It's hard to find a food source for that kind of thing. Immediately below the home in which Jot was born, and thousands of years before that, a crate dragon had died and been pristinely preserved by Jot's front yard. There were very few Jawas who had ever met Jot who hadn't heard that story. Most on the Sandcrawler had heard it more than once, and very few had the patience for further retellings. As important as it had once been to him, Jot was also growing tired of the tale. The scenes he once recounted with exuberance seemed less remarkable with each performance. He had leaned too hard in his story, and he knew he was robbing it of its luster. Several weeks after Jot discovered the gap.
Story? Could this be the story of the Jedi who slew the crate dragon on Tatooine many years ago?
Well, I mean, who's to say that it's not the same crate dragon? There aren't that many of them. Several weeks after Jot discovered the gap below the bulk belt, the wind blew fiercely over the dunes near a sandcrawler, pulling a news story up from the depths. The sandcrawler's crew was asleep, enjoying a rare off-duty night, while the ship rode out a massive windstorm that threatened to flood their engines with grit. The next morning, a long-dormant freighter had been uncovered so completely on a nearby dune that the first Jawas to see it would have sworn that it had crash-landed while the ship's crew ate breakfast. It was the biggest score the Sandcrawler had found in months, and every Jawa on board delighted in ransacking it. Within the hour, the freighter had been thoroughly shut. Small hands ripped and sawed and pried at every panel, every cable, every millimeter of circuitry within. The species of the ship's long-dead pilot was unidentifiable, but their profession was evinced by the cockpit's less savory salvage. A modified blaster rifle, thermal detonators, ancient Mandalorian armor, and a still-functioning datapad that held several hundred expired warrants for criminals throughout the galaxy. This pilot was a bounty hunter, and based on the quality of their gear, an awfully successful one. Huh. What do you think it was? Spar?
Probably. I mean, we didn't real. I mean, Spar simply disappeared many years ago after, well, the Empire took over Mandalore.
Could be Jedi cast. Jad was bullied into scouting the ship at the dig site's perimeter while the rest of the crew picked the ship clean for valuables, most of which would end up squirreled away in the spacious pockets of their robes. It wasn't the first time Jad had been buffaloed into a unwanted task by his clan. He was of a size that was terribly convenient for bullies. Buffaloes don't exist in... Okay. During his half-hearted reconnaissance, Jot noticed a figure partially buried on the opposite side of the dune from where his team found the crashed freighter. Embedded up to its midsection was an astromech droid, an outdated, bulky black bucket that had not been nearly as well preserved as the bounty hunter's other belongings. A large, rusted hole in its central hull showcased telltale signs of fusion cell corrosion, which inevitably meant every component in its core chassis was well beyond repair. The droid's dome, however, was intriguing. John had seen several astromech droids tumble down the salvage line to be repaired, cleaned, and sold. This unit was clearly a custom job. Its hull projector was installed onto a secondary processing unit, complete with its own discrete data drive and internal power source. All this custom hardware was housed in a single detachable fixture, which, as near as John could tell, also made this processor completely redundant. For some reason, that long-dead bounty hunter had given his droid a second brain. So what kind of bounty hunter would have Mandalorian armor and an astromech droid?
No, it can't be Boba Fett. Boba Fett had a protocol droid.
And also Boba Fett is still alive at this point.
Yeah, that's probably the most obvious thing you should know about Boba Fett right now. I don't know. I don't really see Mandalorians with astromech droids.
Maybe not a Mandalorian, just someone in the armor?
Yeah, a lot of bounty hunters have Mandalorian armor, but are not Mandalorians.
Mysteries upon mysteries. Could be ex-Death Watch. Working carefully, Jot ran his driver across the shallow seam under the droid's domed head, granting access to this peculiar construction, which, to Jot's delight, could be easily slid out of its sockets. Jot tucked the whole holo projector unit into the folds of his robe. It was only fair that he took home the prize too, he figured. Jot raced back to the sandcrawler, back to the privacy of his wedge-shaped compartment, grateful that his shipmates were too occupied with the freighter to notice his clumsy attempt at smuggling. He cleared a place for the device in the center of the compartment, giving him more space among the scrap than he gave himself. Jawas are not known for their sense of aesthetics, and Jot was no exception, but he appreciated the fit of the holo projector unit in his tiny space. He had thought of this room as his own, and had been fiercely secretive about it since he first discovered it. Now the gap belonged to the projector. They felt intended for each other, pieces that interlocked by design. After several minutes of meticulously sorting his collection into neat piles, Jot dug up a memory core that he had found in the gap during his very first visit. He lifted the core to his mouth and pressed his tongue gently against its metal contacts, and felt a harsh shower jolt course through him. Good. The core's internal battery was still functioning, meaning the data inside was probably still intact. He nervously inserted the memory core into the holo projector unit's drive, and the device immediately worked to life. Beneath the droid's visible interface, not that Jot would have been able to decipher the process even if he could see it, complex subroutines simultaneously examined, counter-programmed, and decrypted the memory core's content, displaying them seconds later through the holo projector's lens. Jot wasn't aware of this, but this decryption software was as sophisticated as it was illegal, exceptionally preposterously illegal. Man, this bounty hunter story is so interesting I want to write a fanfic. For a moment, the gap was flooded with formless gray light. It caught Jot by surprise, momentarily blinding him, sending him reeling, panicked into the compartment's blisteringly hot starboard well. Within seconds, the light retreated to a few centimeters in front of the projector, taking shape with remarkable clarity. Jot's vision cleared. He saw stars. Not the remnants of the flash. Stars. He saw the soft curvature of Tatooine near the bottom of the projection, its surface lined with bloated stripes of muted orange, amber, and tan, punctuated with an enormous red crater. He saw the bow of a starship peeking up into the projection, the back of the pilot's head barely visible in the bridge. The ship was rolling slowly counterclockwise, but the pilot jerked it back into alignment. Then another roll, then a correction, and so on. The ship was crashing, but it had not crashed, which meant, for the next few minutes at least, Jot could continue to witness its descent. This custom droid component had given Jot a first-hand account of a ship's final doomed flight through the stars. When Storyteller first flashed this image into existence, Jot's eyes flooded with stinging tears. Seeing this story, seeing stars and flights and the only planet he had ever lived on from kilometers above, his eyes would not dry for some time. Jawas cried, confirmed.
Also, a lot of Jawas never been off Tatooine.
And yet some have. They leave the planet often enough that they are fairly scattered throughout the galaxy. But those are all stories for other days. Jot couldn't recall when his desire to leave Tatooine first surfaced. As a child, he loved to tinker with whatever busted gadgets the sands of Tatooine proffered. Hull chessboards, land speeder engines, droid servo motors, and the like. He was encouraged to pursue his experimentation, but it wasn't nearly enough to satisfy his curiosity. He hungered for the opportunity to bury himself in the guts of a Corellian Corvette, to optimize the thrusters of a starfighter, to repair the hyperdrive motivator of a galactic cruiser carrier. Jot, of course, did not have the first clue how to do any of those things. But that wasn't really a concern. Starships, like everything else, were just parts. They might interlock in inscrutable ways, but by Jot's calculation, when broken down the requisite number of parts, everything in the universe was made of connected parts. Sandcrawlers comprised specialized systems that let them operate in Tatooine's harsh environment. These systems were made of complex and simple machines, all of which were made from interlocking parts. The bright white...
Parts within parts, cogs within cogs, plans within plans.
Spears within spears. You know, because atoms... The bright white bones of Jot's crate dragon were just parts of a skeleton, engineered over countless generations by unforgiving biological imperatives. The stars, too, were parts, of a sort. Jot knew as much about astronomy as he did about galactic carrier cruiser hyperdrive motivators, but he knew the stars moved through the sky in a set, immutable order. If it had parts, it could be understood. Jot knew that, given enough time inside a starship, he could learn its parts, learn how to make them behave. And if he could learn how to make them behave, Jot could earn his place in the sky. Jot was insatiable now. With Storyteller in a private place in which to enjoy its tales, Jot's lack of enthusiasm for his work on the Sandcore had become problematic. A few days after discovering Storyteller, Jot had missed an entire shift pouring through his salvage memory core. He had looped through its contents countless times, watching archived business transactions, slideshows of exotic vacations, and messages exchanged with loved ones. He couldn't understand a word of those messages, but their sender, a bald, cheerful older man, was almost always belting out a warm, deep laugh that brought a smile to Jot's face. So the Mandalorian had family. That's sweet. And then he would watch the Core's final recording, breathless and sick, as this cheerful man's ship... So it was the Mandalorian himself who was the bald, cheerful older man. But he still had family. And then he would watch the Core's final recording, breathless and sick, as this cheerful man's ship careened downward to its final resting place, deep within the dunes. Jot treasured the stories on this memory core, but he knew that these recordings, when told exhaustively, lost their magic. He refused to ruin these recordings with overexertion. Storyteller needed new stories to tell. Jot requested a transfer off the salvage line, which his supervisor, frustrated with Jot's recent spotty attendance, was more than happy to grant. Jot was placed on the final prep team, operating out of the ship's loading bay. It was a few decks away from his gap, making it difficult for Jot to take Storyteller breaks during his shifts, but the position offered a benefit that made up for that inconvenience. The job Jot carved out for himself was in firmware repair, a role he performed by optimizing the loading speed of memory cores within droids that were ready to sell. Most Jawas aren't exemplary computer scientists, but reformatting a memory core to clear its cache was an extremely straightforward operation. Well, most Jawas aren't exemplary computer science. Blizz?
Ah, yes, Blizz.
Cute little guy. This kind of reformatting was standard practice on salvage ships like this one. Customers wanted to believe their products to be as new as possible, despite purchasing them from an enormous mobile dumpster. After 2 days of on-the-job training, Jot excelled at increasing performance for the ship's outgoing product. His new supervisor was delighted with his efficacy, but was confused by Jot's refusal to do his work in the loading bay alongside the rest of the prep team. Had she really stopped to think about it, Jot's supervisor would realize she didn't quite know where Jot was doing his work. Jot's days in his new position were filled with uninterrupted delight. He was able to spend a majority of his time in the gap, where he'd speared away a new memory core for Storyteller to decrypt and explore. He watched the new stories with rapt attention, trying to memorize each and every detail, making silent promises to remember them to the best of his ability. He had to remember, because after reviewing each memory core, he gently removed its casing, carefully detached its internal battery, instantly erasing its contents in the pursuit of optimization. Jot deplored doing it, but if his work suffered, he would be cut off from this infinite supply of stories. He could view the projections only once. Then he destroyed them forever, spending the following hours reintegrating the memory unit back into the droid that had housed it. The heartbreak Jot felt with each eraser was worth it, given the wonder of the preceding hours. Jot's second-hand memories took him to the far reaches of the galaxy, to places few Tatooinians had ever witnessed. A forest of towering, pointy trees that blanketed an entire planet in rush greens and crimsons. Note to self, check out list of forest planets. The pristine bridge of an Imperial freighter bathed in even lines of light neon. A city of glowing lights hidden under the waters of a perfectly still sea. Now that can't possibly be Manon. Dak?
Probably. I was actually thinking Tatooine before it was Tatooine, but nah, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, why would Tatooine have underwater cities? It was a tropical planet, not an ocean planet.
Oh, underwater cities. Yeah, that can either be Manon or Dak.
And into the stars. Astromech Droid's memory cores were filled with the most spectacular logs of their owners' flights. In those stories, Jot would push back the hood of his robe and lift his face into the hologram, surrounding himself with the illusion of passing stars. He would close his eyes as he approached the image, then open them. For a moment, his mind could trick itself into thinking this was his flight, his ship, his sky. So I guess everything doesn't look blue with these holograms? Those moments of delusion were the happiest of Jot's planet-bound life. It was Jot's preference for Astromech Droid memories that led him to stake out a particular R2 unit acquired by Snatchers in the canyons outside of Mos Eisley. It had caught nearly everyone's eye on the prep team, mostly because of how little prep it actually needed. Most droids that came down the line needed exhaustive scoring to give their rusted chassis semblance of presentability to the customer. This R2 unit looked like it hadn't spent a minute in the dunes. Its components weren't flooded with sands. Its treads looked like they had been replaced yesterday. Its blue and white chassis still had paint, which the desert winds wouldn't have permitted for very long. A few burn marks tarnished its otherwise pristine exterior. Not ion burns from a trigger-happy snatcher, but actual blaster scoring. This R2 unit was a mystery to everyone on board. Jot knew exactly how to solve it. With even more reverence than he usually exerted, Jot removed the R2 unit's memory core from its nearly flawless housing and stole away to the gap. He pressed its contents to his tongue and reflexively yelped as it gave him a potent retaliatory shock. He clasped a hand over his mouth and hoped nobody had heard him, waiting silently to ensure he hadn't betrayed the secrecy of his compartment. After several tense, quiet minutes, he proceeded. He loaded the memory core into Storyteller, and for the first time, Jot's extraordinarily felonious droid had some difficulty decrypting its contents. Wow, R2's cybersecurity is tough. Storyteller whirred worryingly, dedicating more power to the task than Jot thought its small frame was capable of producing. But Storyteller completed its assault with a satisfied chime, laying the R2 unit's story out to bear. Jot's chest sank inside his robe, his mind racing to memorize the odyssey he was witnessing. He watched the R2 unit perform a daring repair on the wing of a sleek silver starship, flak bursting all around its station, missing by centimeters. Phantom Menace? He watched the R2 unit race through an enormous droid factory, a cavernous building, all metal and molten lava, a monolith that put his sandcar to shame. Attack of the Clones? He watched the R2 unit bear witness to some sort of ceremony. A man in black, a woman in a lovely veil, a solemn kiss exchanged over a lake at sunset. Attack of the Clones again? Pretty sure Anakin wasn't wearing black, though. Looked more brown to me. He saw armies of droids as far as the eye could see. He saw swords made of fire. He saw robed people who could actually use magic. The magic people were fighting each other using the fire swords. A pair of them laid low an entire platoon of droids using their magic. Clone Wars? Jot was mystified, enraptured. He leaned against the scalding hall 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds before even realizing it. The picture flickered, and Storyteller projected another memory. Jot saw a woman wearing a long white robe. Her hair was swirled into tight wheels around her ears. She spoke to an unseen audience for less than a minute, then crouched, her calm demeanor shifting to worry for the first time, her arm extending, readying a blaster. Jot could not understand her. He could not understand the languages spoken in any of his stories. But even without hearing her message, Jot could read the concern on her face as plain as day. This was a warning. And the R2 unit's final story showed Jot exactly what her warning was about. A starship the size of a planet. A round, beautiful, hateful vessel with a scale beyond comprehension. It's the size of a small moon. That's pretty easy to comprehend. Of all the impossible images Jot had seen in this R2's memories, this was the most outlandish, and for reasons he didn't understand, the most terrifying. A cold, bubbling fear climbed his throat as he studied the diaphragm.
It's a supermoon.
Do you think Jot's force sensitive? He seems to have a lot of intuition. The warm security of a secret...
There was already a Jawa Jedi.
Wait, really? When?
Well, don't know much about him, but he hated to be called Untini. And he was a counselor.
Wait, where did you find that?
Top 10 alien species that were Jedi.
Okay, this I gotta say. A cold, bubbling fear climbed... The warm security of his secret compartment drained away, and for the first time since discovering the gap, he felt completely exposed. He felt watched. Moments before the image blinked off, Jot noticed a string of numbers in the corner. A date and time. The story had been backed up off an external media source within the past 2 days. This wasn't like the other stories Jot had borrowed from the desert-wearying droids he serviced. This wasn't an ancient flight log of a long-crashed freighter, or the final moments in the life of a wandering abandoned droid. This story, with the magic and the fire swords and the crouching woman in the planet-sized ship, it was happening right now. Somewhere in space, this may all be happening right now. The gravity of this realization descended on Jot suddenly. His face went numb. His entire life, Jot had happily served as spectator to the stories that constantly unfolded around him. Even in the tale of the Crate Dragon, he wasn't the star. His brothers were the first to find the skeleton that morning. His father finished excavating it. His mother adorned the skull with a crown of desert sage and funnel flowers. Jot was just there. But being there wasn't good enough now. The next part of this droid story, if not a chapter, just a line, was Jot's responsibility to author. Like the glistening bones of his dragon, like the stars in the sky, like every panel and fiber and joiner in the machines he had worked with every day of his life, Jot was now a part of something too. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't just a passive observer of the story of his life, he was a participant. It was an enlightenment the likes of which few are lucky enough to experience during the span of their lives. Jot just happened to find it in a furnace-hot, coffin-sized design flaw in the side of a rolling junkyard. Storyteller ejected the R2 droid's memory core, its chronicles ended. Jot stowed it in the folds of his twice-hemmed robe, its data still intact. The thought of carrying out the data wipe didn't even cross his mind. Jot didn't believe himself worthy to participate in the droid story. Man, it's a good thing he didn't. That would have ended badly for everyone. He certainly did not deserve to bring it to an unceremonious end. Jot wriggled his way out of the compartments, unconcerned about being spotted as he squeezed through its secret entrance and back into playing sights. He ran, stumbling, down the sandcrawler's decks and gasped with relief upon seeing the still deactivated R2 droid in the loading dock. He loaded its memory core back into its housing, hands trembling with excitement. John knew his dereliction of duty would eventually be discovered by some hapless customer after the R2 unit was reactivated and brought out to market. He didn't care. His departure from the Sandcrawler was imminent and long overdue. Tomorrow he would leave the salvage team. He would find a ship in Mos Eisley or Anchorhead that would have him no matter what. He would see the stars and write stories about each and every one of them. He would become an irreplaceable part of more and more designs, till at long last he could see fully the shape of the machine that was made for him. Wonder whatever happened to the little guy. Raven by Saba Tahir. The boy talked too much. If Ray were never apt with such disrespected her elders, she'd be nursing a bruised bottom and milking Vanthus until her fingers turned blue for gold. Good. Okay, so confirmation that blue milk that comes from Vanthus and that Tuskens are terrible parents. Though the old man wasn't much better, hemming and hawing over the droids like
Yeah. Well, I was thinking something, but, we'll get to well-known Tusken Raiders later.
over the droids like an Amoidian bargaining over a trade deal. Okay, how does this Ghorfa know what an Amoidian is? True Unqua! Why were they so damn slow? Rayron needed in that Sandcrawler, and she needed in there now. Rayron shifted her Gadurfi from her right hand to her left and shook the sand from her ropes. Just pick something, you old fool. The Jawas sold junked-up droids made shiny with dollops of oil in the right places. Rayron snorted. Only an idiot farmer would be stupid enough to buy them. Moisture farmer specifically. Rayron's hands closed tight over the blaster at her waist. Stinking, sweating peasants who thought they had more right to the desert and its gifts than she did. Yeah, that's the thing you gotta know about Tuskens. They think they're the only species on Tatooine that matters. The farmer settled on a dull gold prodigal unit.
I thought Tuskens kept their own now since the incident.
The tribes are in disagreements. Each has its own policy. Which jabbered at him in a tinny voice until the old man snapped at it to shut up. Typical. Farmers treated anything that didn't look like them. Them like Bantha. Droids, raiders, Jawas, all the same. Second class, lesser. Oh, that's rich coming from a Tusken. Hey, Miss, I enslaved Jawas. You definitely never treated anything that doesn't look like you like a second-class citizen. No, not at all. Rayron daydreamed about proving to them who exactly was lesser. She daydreamed about taking her father's Gadurfi and wreaking bloody havoc. And if not that, then simply proving herself. Proving that she was meant for more than hiding from crate dragons in the waste, caring for her bantha and her children and her mate. But the Raider women in her clan did not join battle. Never mind that she spun the Gadurfi better than any of her useless male cousins. Alright, so this is one of those tribes like we see in Attack of the Clones, where the female Tuskens dress differently than the males, and they're kind of gender segregated. And that also must mean this is the one where the younglings also have their own unisex outfits. Like, tribes like that are becoming more and more rare in the Disney canon. Now that they were especially common in the previous canon. Legends. Raider women did not fight, and Raider women were not meant for war, and so Rayron's daydreams would continue to be just that. Once again, such an egotistical Tusken, thinking her own clan's ways are the ways of her whole species. Unless she hunched down behind the condenser. She didn't dare think on it, lest doing so was to drive the possibility from ever existing. There was no guarantee she'd even be able to steal the item the trader requested, let alone get it to him in one piece without the Jawas noticing. The old man and the boy finally settled on their second unit, a white and red striped asteroid droid. The two new purchases tottered through the blistering sands toward the farmer's homestead. Not much time left now. True Unqua! She needed a distraction. Would that she had an ally, someone to make a ruckus so she could dash into the Sandcrawler, find the item, and disappear back into the waste. Someone she could turn to, someone who wanted off this hellish rock as badly as she did. She thought briefly of Kiera so she's one of those... She's part of one of those clans, tribes where they have names like Aurora or other such things. He wielded the Ghorfas of natural grace steadily as a starving crate. He didn't think women should remain home during the raids, and he made her laugh. He was a good friend. Rayburn would have liked him at her side, for she did not know what she would find in Mos Eisley when she took the item to the trader. He might cheat her, tell her that the price for a berth off planet had gone up. He might be selling her into slavery, and she wouldn't even know. Not until she was dropped onto Kessel to be starved and beaten and worked to death. I wonder if any Tuskens have actually made their way to Kessel by that method.
Well, no, but I do know of... Well, but before the incident, there was also the Great Massacre.
And of course, we've had plenty of Tuskens make their way off planets, like the Grave Tuskens. And there was Hor.
Check out Masters of Terra's Kazi.
No, really don't. Read up on the lore all you want, but do not play the game itself. Just play Solo Calibur instead.
Trust me, you are going to hate Masters of Terra's Kazi.
Everyone does. Yes, it would be nice to have an ally, and Kurur would have been a fine one. Till right now, she'd been gone long enough that her return would result in questions that she couldn't answer. Now without shaming her family, now without earning weeks of icy silence from the rest of the clan. And even Kurur wouldn't speak to her now, not if he didn't want to be shunned as well. And as if wanting something more than banthas and heats and raids was shameful. But as quick as Rayburn's anger rose, it faded. Her people's ways allowed them to survive, though they were surrounded on all sides by enemies. She'd gone back only for a day, and already she yearned for her mother's black melon pudding, for the gravelly voice of her father as he told stories by the fire. Man, black melon pudding has got to taste awful.
Oh yeah, black melon pudding. Yeah, I know the black melons from Tatooine. They taste pretty awful, but you're required to drink them by Tusken law.
I mean, there aren't a lot of cacti. Where else are you going to get water? She would miss them, she knew it, and she would not see them again, for if she did make it off planet, she could never return to Tatooine. No use dwelling, you've made your decision. Okay, another Tusken off planet, Sardu Salo. Look, I don't need to go through the list. The thing is, a fair number of them have made their way off planets, despite the fact that they're culturally not supposed to want to. Harsh words echoed off the flats, and Rayburn turned her attention back to the moisture farmers and the Jawas. The old farmer was having words with the lead Jawa, gesticulating like a madman at the astromech droid, which billowed a damning plume of black smoke. The boy standing beside the golden droid gestured at another unit, squad in blue. Now, Rayburn, while they're not looking. She dropped low, thankful for the simple child's mask she wore made of leather and cloth. Childs have a unique mask, so...
Oh yeah, there's this. Uncle Owen, what about this one? That droid is gigantic. That droid is pretty big, and it's thick and tight, and it's titled Super Droid. Let's buy it. So they buy it, then... what's going on? It says he has a rumbly in his servo motors, then the droid explodes.
Yeah, they tend to do that.
Thanks for nothing, Super Droid.
Yep. Rayburn scuttled from behind the... Kind of reminds me of that one HK-50 you can find where you just blocks a little bit and then boom. Rayburn scuttled from...
Wait, wasn't that an astromech droid from Knights of the Old Republic?
I'm talking about KOTOR 2.
Oh. Then, yeah.
As the Jawas and the farmers argued over the droids, Rayburn scuttled from behind the condenser into the shadow of the sandcrawler. She crept carefully into the hollow space between the two enormous tracks that carried the transport across Tatooine's unforgiving terrain. Then she turned her head out to the guts of the crawler, digging with gloved hands through wires and gears and tubes. There must be a handle around here. There must. There is. But where? The raised voices dropped. The mishap outside dealt with. Any movement, the sandcrawler would move and she'd be squashed between its tracks. Come on, Rayrin! Her hands grew more frantic until finally her fingers closed on a long metal bar. Yes! She grabbed it, turned, and moments later lifted herself into a dim cargo hold. A scant bit of light filtered in from a row of tiny portholes. Outside, the farmers escorted their new purchases into their homestead. The sandcrawler rumbled to life. Now, fighting, but where to begin? The grumble of the Jawas as they entered the front of the hold stopped her in her tracks until she had the sense to dive behind a giant rusted feather raider engine. She couldn't hear the Jawas' steps. They walked lightly as cats, but she could smell the damn things. So apparently cats are on Tatooine. Rayron gagged behind her mask. They were worse than the farmers, and with a hum of flies about them. Oh yeah, they got a deal there, something about keeping the moisture in. The Jawas maneuvered the leftover merchandise back into the hold, and then their reek faded. Sandcrawler slowly rolled east toward Tashi Station and Anchorhead. Rayron would need to be long gone by then. With that, she turned her attention to her search, but hopelessness quickly engulfed her. The trader hadn't given her much to go. He'd found her in Bastine 3 weeks ago. No, heavily hooded and trying to hawk some stolen goods. Bastine the city, not Bastine the planet. That's confusing. He had been lying low himself. Despite meeting twice with him, she'd yet to see his face, and she knew only that he was humanoid in form. It will be small, he told her, perhaps stored in a bag or a box, no larger than your hands, and it can be one of many colors. Blue, green, purple. The Jawas will know what it is and may have locked it away. Rayron rifled through the nearest pile of junk before quickly dismissing it. The Jawas were far more fastidious about their possessions than their hygiene. They wouldn't leave something of value just lying around. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness, but it was nearly impossible to tell which direction she should look in. All the piles of junk looked exactly the same. She cursed the Jawas, stinking little hoarders. Her neck prickled and she whirled, scanning the piles behind her. If there was a Jawa sneaking around back here, she'd know, right? She sniffed the air. Nothing but stale oil and rust. There, in the back left-hand corner of the hold, so covered up she nearly missed it, sat a large metal box. She edged closer, trying not to upset any of the piles of junk, wincing when a tray of tiny gears clattered loudly as she passed. She heard rustling at the front of the hold and hunkered down, waiting. The raspy voice of a Jawa sounded, and she didn't dare to even breathe. Leave. Leave. But the Jawa didn't leave. Instead, it trotted closer, muttering to itself. She could smell it, hear the flies. It would turn at any moment and spot her hiding. Rayron tightened her hand on her blaster. She'd have to kill the damn creature. So much for not treating those different from you like second-class citizens, eh? But moments later, the Jawa disappeared back toward the main hold, still muttering. The sandcrawler trundled onward. Rayron moved quickly for the box. It was nearly as tall as she was, and a lock hung from it. An ancient sword Rayron only ever heard of in the stories her father told. Rayron pulled on it. It should have come right off. Instead, she got a lungful of rust and suppressed a cough. True, quoi. She cast about until she found a long, heavy bar with a notch at the ends. She wedged it between the two prongs of the lock and jerked down with all her might, huffing through her mask. The lock held. The sandcrawler began to slow. The next homestead wasn't far, and if the Jawas would be back in the hold pulling out their merchandise. If Rayron was going to find the trader's item, she needed to find it now. It might not even be in here. You might be wasting your time for nothing. But some strange feeling deep down in her guts, told Rayron that the item she needed was here. Just as she knew her mother's touch and the shuffle of her bantha, she knew this lockbox held her salvation. The cargo hold had clattered as the sandcrawler went over a bump. Rayron considered, then grabbed her blaster. She took a wary step back and, at the next bump, fired. The resulting blast incinerated the lock and half the box, too. Rayron burned a hole through her glove, yanking the smoking lid open. Careful, if there's anything Kotor has taught me is that breaking open something to get the contents inside might just end up breaking those contents. Quickly. She pawed through sacks of bolts, hair-thin gold wires, and what appeared to be the bones of some large animal. And then she spotted a shimmer, deep green, like the light that dashed across Tatooine's horizon at dusk. Green flash. The moment the rock was in her hand, she felt whole, as if she'd been missing a limb her entire life and never known it, and she finally had it back. She marveled at it, a tiny thing no longer than her palm and jagged on one end. It was broken. Where was the other half? Rayburn searched through the safe for the rest of the rock, but she sensed it wasn't there. There. At a sound on the other side of the cargo hold, she froze, terror in her stomach, not for herself, but for the rock. They wouldn't take it from her. It belonged to her, no one else. But why this attachment? Why did she feel this way when she never even seen this thing before? She peered down at it, the way it shimmered in the orange light of the hold. Think it's a lightsaber crystal? Maybe she's force sensitive.
That is possible. There have been sane people Jedi as well.
Indeed. Though they were adopted into the tribe, not born in it, technically. Now, I'm sure there's probably some way to make them force sensitive. I mean, if there can be an Ewok Jedi, who's to say?
There is an Ewok Jedi.
I know. I've seen that role-playing game sourcebook artwork, too. What power did it have over her? Was this what her mother spoke of when she spoke of the bond with her Mantha? Rayra never felt it, though she had raised the same mild-mannered beast since she was a child. To her, it was more a pet than a friend. If the attachment she felt to this rock was anything like what raiders were supposed to feel for their Banthas, then Rayra understood the reason the beast was so revered among her people. She understood why raider units succeeded or failed based on the relationship between the two partners' Banthas. If this rock was ever taken from her, she waged war for it. If she ever found the other piece of it, he who owned it would also own a piece of her, and she of him. How then will I part with it? How, when giving it to the trader, is the only way to escape this place? She looked through one of the tiny windows. The moisture farmer's homestead was long gone now, a bump in the distance. The boy would be bathing the droids, preparing them for work. In the meantime, the next farm was close enough that the outbuildings were in sight, their shadows long in the coming twilight. Night drew close, and Rayra knew that she couldn't travel the desert safely after sunset. She didn't have time to think or plunder any longer. She had to go. Rayburn found the hatch and waited beside it until the sandcar slowed to a halt. The second it did, she yanked open the hatch and dropped out, shoving it closed just as the Jawas entered the hold to pull out their wares once more. Hard thudding. Rayburn slipped through the tracks and around the crawler. She was a shadow, no more visible to the farmers emerging from their homes than a speck of dust. By nightfall, she'd have raided a nearby homestead for transport. By morning, she'd be in Mos Eisley. Hey, she stole my speeder! At which point, she'd have to give the trader the rock. Though, she frowned to herself as she gazed at it. Looks much more like a crystal than a rock. She wouldn't give it up. She couldn't. You won't have to, a calm voice within her said. You will find a way when the time comes to get what you need. You've gotten this far, haven't you? If that thought to sustain her, Rayburn disappeared into Tatooine's approaching night, her blood singing, and her future clutched in her hands. Okay, so Sam, with an average of getting like 2 stories done every episode, I'm starting to think maybe you should like return the library books because like there's no way we're gonna get to them in time before they're due.
Yeah.
If this alone is gonna take us another month.
Yeah. Yeah, but I'll return the library books when they're due.
Okay. Okay, in the meantime, with only 2 minutes left, that's not enough to start on the next story, so, of the 2 we've read today, which do you prefer?
Actually, I prefer from a certain point of view so far.
No, of the 2 stories we read today.
Oh, those 2 stories. Well, the Sand People one had a lot of action, but I like that the Jawa one had many mysteries and stories to tell. I think the Sand People one.
Yeah. And it's too bad that we're never going to see Rayran or Jad again. Okay, so as long as we're talking about Jawas and Tuskens, okay, which version of their backstory do you like better? The one where they both evolved from Kumunga, or the one where Tuskens are also relatives to humans and Jawas aren't actually native to Tatooine, as was implied in KOTOR 1?
I think the Kumunga one.
I mean, yeah, that's the one that shows up in the Dawn of the Jedi comics, and that is some great artwork, and like, I guess good writing? I'm not exactly the best judge of good writing. Alright, so, any last minute things you need to say, or should we wrap up here?
We'll wrap up here.
Alright.